Hey, Joe.
Hey, Mom.
So this month we're talking about love, and we had the joy of including my 77-year-old mom and 25-year-old son to join the conversation. We wanted to create a multi-generational space and dig deep into the experience of love.
Yeah, it was so great. We got to dig into the different forms and types of love, what we thought about the essence of love and the origins of those beliefs. We also got into social media and its impact on how younger generations experience love and kind of affects the way that they communicate and interact.
Yeah, at one point my son Brendan made the comment that the future looks dire. It was really great to see how just through this one conversation we had, we were able to come around to a super hopeful view of the future.
Yeah, that's what I love about this podcast is how without preaching at people or going to conversations with motives to change their ideas, we can just show up for each other, and we're becoming home for each other one conversation at a time through asking questions, through showing up and just being super genuine and finding common ground.
Yeah, I mean, my mom grew up in a super different time, and she's formed her own beliefs through her experiences, and honestly a lot of them clash with different perspectives of the younger generations. And I had a couple concerns leading into this conversation that there would be so much tension that something could erupt, but it was so beautiful to be part of a 2-hour moment in time where these differing opinions and experiences and perspectives could just be shared and respected. It was a great conversation.
Absolutely, it was. It is super important that this series of episodes is listened to or watched on YouTube, just in order, because the conversation really does grow and build on the foundation of each previous idea and conversation that we have. So for our listeners, please make sure that you start with Love Part 1 and work your way through the conversation in order, just to really understand our heart behind what each person is sharing.
For sure. All right, now let's get into it. Yeah, I think you're leading me beautifully into the next idea, because I know that you grew up in a very different time. Our world was in a different place when you were young and you were getting married for the first time or a second time, and
or third time. Just saying.
But in those earlier years, when you got married to your first husband, I know that was you were very young. It was only a year or less. And then, the second one was a very different situation. But, at that time of your life, the culture and society, culture and society has always had different expectations, especially of women, and how we are to show love and how, we are expected to behave, in relationships or at work. We couldn't even have certain types of jobs. So the fact that you loved all your jobs is a massive blessing. A lot of people hate the work that they do. So
after 77 years, I loved all my jobs. I'm like, wow.
Yeah, that's a massive, that's a big thing. So that's awesome. But talk a little bit about, what seemed to have been maybe, or what you'd observed at that time, in your first or second marriage, about, the role of women as defined by society or religion or culture or, whatever it is, what you were experiencing. And then what did you see that was kind of shifting? Because I don't know. I know when the 60s were happening and kind of the hippie movement was rising, I'm not sure where that lines up with your personal timeline of stories, but how do you kind of see those events and what was going on in the world? How did those things shape your experience as, a new wife or new mother or that kind of thing?
Well, keep in mind, my formative years were in the 50s. And in the 50s, the television shows to watch was Ozzie and Harriet. I don't know if any of you remember Ozzie and Harriet. Or Leave It to Beaver. Did you ever watch those?
I think I've heard of that one.
Yep.
So in those shows, it was good, clean stuff. The mom was a stay-at-home mom. dressed in her pretty little dress and her little heels and doing her housework and cooking her dinners and taking care of her children and greeting them after school. And hubby would come home and dinner would be ready. He would sit down in his easy chair and read a newspaper before dinner, and everything was all hunky-dory. And the same thing with Ozzie and Harriet. Those were my formative years. That's what I grew up thinking marriage was like.
Wow.
Now,
Was
question
you
on
take
that.
care-
That's what you saw on TV. Is that what you saw at home?
No, because my dad was never home. He was rarely home, put it that way.
And when he
So-
was, did it look like what you saw on TV?
Yes, my mom took care of everything. She took care of the house. She did the yard work. She did everything. She took care of us kids. She was the one who gave us spankings when we needed them. And I only had one, maybe
One?
two, maybe two.
Lucky.
I was a good girl.
Brendan,
Brendan, we'll get into the trauma portion later.
Oh yeah, I got quite a few notes.
We'll
on
get
that one.
there. We'll get there. Let's write it down.
But we always
Put a pin in
grew,
that.
Yeah.
we grew up around my paternal grandparents, my dad's parents, and that was the same thing. My grandmother did all the cooking, and Grandpa sat around, watched his TV, and went up to the bar and had a drink or two with his friends. And so the women took care of the household.
Wow.
That's what I grew up with. I never questioned what my part was going to be as a wife. So I just went into those marriages. Well, the first marriage, it was very short, but my mother lived with us, and I worked, he worked. And so we'd come home to a dinner that was fixed by my mother. So it was kind of a different situation. And that ended very badly. And
But can we pause on that for a moment? And do you mind if I get, and feel free to say I'd rather not get into that, but I think it's very interesting and a very informative part of your story. The part that I do know is that you didn't want to marry him, and there was some kind of expectation on you to get into that, and you did it because of that expectation. Do you feel like...
I'm surprised you remember that.
What kind of role, yeah, do you mind talking a little bit about that? And you don't have to get
No, that's fine. I broke off our engagement. And at the time that we did, my mother was in the hospital and had surgery. And when I went in to see her a day or two after I broke off the engagement, she told me that he had come up to see her in the middle of the night, and he was crying and saying that I broke it off and blah, blah, blah. And Mom says to me, she says, I know you love him. I think you need to just go apologize and take the ring back. And because my mom had been through a lot of trauma herself with this illness, she had a mental breakdown at one point, attributed to my dad leaving, their divorce. And so I felt really bad that she had gone through so much pain and trauma, and I didn't want to add to it.
So even though you didn't love him.
I didn't love him, and I did not want to marry him, but I did because I didn't want to hurt my mom.
Wow.
So you did it because you loved your mom.
Yeah.
Wow. Talk about sacrifices for love. Wow. That's crazy. That I feel like is a huge testimony of how deep love can be, and also how on the other side of it, from my perspective, that's terrifying. And I'm like, oh my goodness, that's absolutely terrifying that love could cause that to happen in a relationship, in a marriage. But that's the I feel like love is such a double-edged sword in that way. Like
Mm.
the ways of like how far it can make you sacrifice and how crazy it can be.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and my divorce from him, um, he insisted that my mom live with us. And I want to say he became an alcoholic. He was probably always an alcoholic, and I just didn't see it. When we were married, he was drinking all the time. And after we'd been married a year or so, he got into it with my mom, and he blamed her for all of our problems. And he kicked her out.
Wow.
And it was shortly after that that I actually wound up in a hospital, but mental hospital. But so I didn't have to worry about hurting my mom anymore.
There you go.
She knew. She
Mm.
knew now. So yeah, so that was the end of that.
And this was what year? So what was going on in culturally during
Well,
all this?
this was in the late 60s. So um I can't say that um I was even on the fringe of the things that were going on. Um, President Kennedy was assassinated when I was in high school, a junior in high school. Martin Luther King was assassinated shortly after that. Um, Bobby Kennedy was assassinated shortly after that. So there was a lot of that going on. There was a lot of the free love, the drugs were coming into big play, more out in the open now. And there was a Vietnam War demonstrators. There were people moving to Canada because they didn't want to get drafted into the war. My brother served 2 tours in Vietnam. Um, his second tour was shortly after Richard and I were married. My first husband and I were married. And you had a lot of integration going on or segregation going on down south. None of that really hit me close to home because of where I was living. I lived in the Midwest, and you didn't see a lot of that, but you heard about it on the news. It was on the East Coast, West Coast, down south, mainly in those areas. So, I mean, there was a lot going on. The free love thing was going on. After after my first divorce, I was introduced to that part of life. I didn't take part in that, but I never did the drugs, and I didn't sleep with every guy that I went out with. I just wasn't like that. That was very, very uncomfortable for me. So I didn't get
Well,
into
yeah,
that too
considering you
much.
grew up in the Leave It to Beaver,
Right,
world.
right,
Yeah,
right.
sure.
Yeah.
But
So
I do feel like even like that kind of tends to be what we experience in our country is like things tend to start at the coasts and kind of like work into the middle. It seems like the
yeah.
Midwest is always the last, place to kind of come around to what's going on
Last
in
to
the
show up to the
world.
party.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Last one here. They don't even pregame. They just show up. They're like, "What you guys been doing?" I heard you guys are up to something. That makes me think about, so you were kind of in the Midwest seeing these things happening, but there was
Mhm.
like a detachment there. So you kind of still
Right.
had that little bubble of the 50s expectations and love and things like that. But even the fact that you went through divorce, at the time that you did, I think is, especially considering where you were at the time, it was not, I mean, divorce wasn't a super, or was it? Like, it wasn't super common for young people your age to be getting divorced so soon, or like what was that
Well,
experience?
it was a lot more common than before. I'm sure that um, had my mother been able to get some kind of an education, kind of like where you were, had she been able to get some kind of an education to support us kids, to get a job to support us kids, she would have divorced my father.
Mm,
But in those days, you stayed married regardless of what was going on.
yeah.
You just, a woman just sat back and took it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think in the 60s, that started to change. I can remember, like in the workplace, a woman couldn't wear pants. You had to wear a 3-piece suit, skirt, vest, shirt, whatever, or a dress. You couldn't wear pants. You had to wear nylons. You had to wear dress shoes. And so in the late 60s, early 70s, that started to change.
Mm-hmm.
So I think women have always been fighting for women's rights, even way back then. That as far back as I can remember, and they
So,
still are.
well, yes. So, I mean, we see this kind of shift happening in your time where women are, starting to, uh, in your 20s or so, women are starting to get a little more power, a little more freedom, a little more autonomy. And so culture was really defining a lot, was defining a lot of what was going on and happening, and the family structure started to have a little more freedom to be different, or to to shift or to change. So it's interesting to think about how culture and society affects the home and the family, and relationships, and how we kind of show up, whether we no matter where the love is coming from. Like, in your situation, you were loving your mom, not the guy you were marrying, like you were doing the marriage thing because you loved somebody else. So love is just this really tricky thing. Um, and Brendan, I'm really interested to hear, like, how do you feel like, because you're kind of in LA, in this hub of, I almost want to say, another movement similar to, mom experienced. I never know what to call her. I call her mom, but like when I'm talking to you, I feel like I should say grandma. It's so weird.
Yeah.
So when grandma was kind of looking at and experiencing what was going on sort of out there in the world, with the hippies, and segregation was coming to a head, and so many political things, cultural things, she was kind of buffered from it, whereas you're right in the middle of it. You're in LA, you're out there where they're kind of, they're sort of
pre-gaming.
well, they're gaming. They're like, game on.
They're
Let's
pro
frick
gaming.
let's fricking
Yeah,
do
they're
this.
they're in the thick of it.
Whether you all come along or not, I'm just saying, we're going. I
Yeah,
feel like
we're
that's kind of
gaming.
where you're going.
We're gaming, and you're gonna hear about it
Yeah. So
in the
tell us
news.
about it.
Hey, Mom. I'm having so much fun doing this podcast with you. Thank you so much for being open to the idea of a podcast. Just a project that is centered around vulnerable conversations and showing up for other people.
Yeah, it's a joy, and I'm so glad we live in a time where we can create content like this and hopefully bless someone who's looking to engage with other people on topics that really mean something to our human experience.
Absolutely. I know we invest a lot of time and money into creating the show, and we want our viewers to know that we are listener supported. So if this episode has been helpful or entertaining in some way, would you consider buying the show a coffee?
Yeah, it's a fun way to support the project and help us know that it blessed you. If buying a coffee, though, isn't something you can do right now, we'd love it if you would rate and share the show episodes on your own social media and help us reach more people.
Yes, we'd really appreciate all the prayers, good vibes, whether you buy us a coffee or share the content. We just want you to know we value you and your presence, and we can't wait to see where this project goes.
All right, check the show notes for links on how to buy us a coffee, but for now, let's get back to the conversation. So how do you see, like, what are you experiencing? I know we were talking the other night just about, your kind of where you're at as far as, like, you up to this point have really felt like you just don't really want to get into, you know, deep relationships, or like the ones that you have hadn't come out very well. So you're like, bro, I'm all about my freedom, all about my, you know, my freedom of choice, and all, you know, I don't really want to get too deep because I just want to, you know, kind of just chill for a little bit. So that's cool. But then, like, is that pretty common? Because I do feel like people are waiting longer and longer to get married. I think the average, I didn't look up the statistic on this, but like, I think people are getting married in their 30s now, or having kids even without getting married, or like it's just a whole different world. People don't, they think getting married in your 20s is like, bro, you're like a baby, you're way too young to get married. So Joellen has some stats for us.
So the average age for marriage today in the United States is 27 for women and 29 for men.
That's actually younger
Wow.
than I thought. I thought it used to be like 35 or something. Like it had gotten crazy, or maybe I just
Bro,
have known so many people who waited till their 30s, but
I'm so
I mean,
sheltered right now.
statistically, I guess.
Living in my little homeschooled world where everybody got married at 18 and I'm like 27. Oh my gosh.
Okay, well, maybe you're in a cult, but maybe we can
No,
get to
no.
that later.
Yeah, maybe that's another thing
I'll
to
save
talk
that for
about.
the trauma. Let me write that
When we
down.
get to the trauma piece, we'll talk about cults. It's gonna be great.
Anyway.
So, Brendan, talk to us about like kind of what you're seeing culturally as far as like what role does love play, whether romantically, professionally, friendship wise? What's going on in LA? Live from LA.
Live
Give
from
us-
LA, it's Brendan Diaz. Yeah,
give us
nice
the
and
skinny.
it's a sunny day here. It's a sunny day. What else is new? I think that these I think it all does come back to, you know, our experiences and how they shape us. I think I think
We're glad you think.
yes, that's good. I do believe that social media has played a big part, I think, in the way that people, how their minds work and how their brains, we're exposed to a lot more than ever before in
Yeah.
history of everything that's happening in the world, of whatever our friends are doing. Like, we know even day to day what's going on in our friends' lives, in our families' lives, in people's lives around the world. We're seeing these crazy things happen all around us. These I don't know, these natural disasters getting worse. These, I don't know, these things like these wars still happening, and these things like shootings happening almost every other day in the US. We see a lot of these just bad things happening in the world. So that's definitely an influence on how a lot of people carry their lives and how they think of the future and how they see the world. I know a lot of people that I've met, even when I lived back in Kansas, people like younger generation, people my age, um, who don't want to bring in more people because there's more people in this world than ever before, and they're you know, they care about these bad things that keep happening, and so they want to, they're a lot more, I believe, more attentive and active in wanting to change how the kind of notifications that pop up on their phone. I believe they want to be able to, when it comes to like environmental issues are a big issue for a lot of the younger generation, enough so to where I've had multiple people in my life say they don't want to have kids because there's, you know, there's already too much going on. There's too many people in this world right now. I've heard that from a lot of people my age. So yeah, that's a big influence on the way that people lead their lives. And I believe that, I mean, divorce is, you know, a much higher rate. I want to say the highest has ever been. I haven't seen the numbers. That's just what, it seems to be getting higher and higher over the years. And so that would mean that, you know, these younger generations are, if it's happening more often, then a lot of people are seeing it happen more often. I talk to a lot of friends who I feel like the majority of them have these family issues, have these parents who didn't stay together. And so I meet a lot of people whose parents are divorced, whose, I don't know, mom or dad were never around. So and I have a very similar experience. So with a lot of these people, we have, I suppose, these specific examples of, I guess, love, if that's what you want to call it, these or their attempts at love, I suppose, from previous examples. And I mean, I don't want to go through that, I suppose. But I when I talk to women, younger women my age, a lot of them still do like believe in this kind of a love with someone else, and maybe some of them start a family, some of them don't want to do that. Um, and but a lot of them still believe in that, which is, I guess, which is nice. But still, a big handful don't believe in this kind of like a forever kind of like a happy ending.
Mhm.
And I know a lot of these younger people are they care a lot about their own happiness. I believe they've seen examples of, I don't know, people getting up early, slaving away for the entire day, coming back home. Maybe, you know, some of these examples, their parents come home and they they'll kind of, what's the word? They'll just kind of, I guess, decompress, offload the stress, maybe with just sitting watching TV or drinking beer or, I don't know, getting in arguments or these kinds of things. And I feel like a lot of people just don't want to deal with any of that. So and it's more expensive now than ever to live life. You know what I mean? It's more expensive now to own a home. It's more expensive to have kids. So that's also another reason why a lot of younger people just don't even want to deal with that. And the wages that we're getting paid are not exactly, you know, following and getting higher along with that same scale that the cost of living is.
Yeah.
So I think the future just looks very dire, I think. And so, yeah, unfortunately. So, so I feel like, so I feel like that's a big reason why we just really want to take care of ourselves. And that's also a very Western thing to feel, but definitely want to take care of ourselves and our happiness. And so when it comes to things like careers, we want to make sure that we have enough time for ourselves. You know, we don't want to be sitting, giving our time, our energy to someone else for the majority of our life. That's not something that sounds very appealing to a lot of people my age. We really want to spend the time and our energy with our people that we love, including ourselves and our friends. And we want to do things like travel and these different activities or these different endeavors or activities that we really love to partake in before the world ends. So I think that's what is really motivating a lot of people my age
Wow,
to
that's what you're saying.
in the way they lead their lives.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, I saw a TikTok video, I think, or a reel somewhere. I don't know if it's on TikTok. It was like, bro, the American dream is no longer to own your own home. It's to be able to
Pay your
take
bills.
6 months off work and just travel and do whatever the heck you want to do. He didn't use the word heck, but do whatever you want to do and like freedom. I think it feels like to me the young generation is like the new American dream for them is freedom, like freedom of time, freedom of choice, you know, to go and just be and do and the thing, all those things. But
Absolutely.
Joellen, I want you to chime in here because you are Brendan's age, you're in a different place here. So for some context for our viewers, both Joellen and Brendan were homeschooled. And they're very different people. So it's really interesting to me to see how, you know, because it's easy to say, oh, well, that person was in public school and they spent all their time away from family and away from home and away from, whatever anyway. And, so they kind of went one route that's pretty, stereotypical or whatever. And then you've got the other end of the spectrum of the kid who's homeschooled and there's all these words surrounding that, like sheltered and, in a bubble and like unsocial and all the things. And they go a different way. But these two people right here at this table were both homeschooled, and their experiences were still very different. So I really want to hear, Joellen, you kind of talk about, because you're in the same age range as Brendan, but you're living a very different experience than Brendan just described. So talk to us about kind of what's going on in your life and how love is kind of manifesting or showing up, or what are your perspectives on what you're experiencing in your generation that might be different?
I feel like I'm sitting in this really awkward place between like what Gmon talked about and what Brendan talked about. And I'm like, yeah, I feel both of those. It's so weird because my parents are boomers. So they're old. No, I'm kidding. They're not that old.
Okay,
We have
boomer.
a lot of boomer listeners, girl.
Oh,
Okay, boomer. Okay, boomer.
Yeah, so like my parents, I mean, my mom did have me when she was 39. So I'm at the very end of all the kids. And that was just kind of the world I grew up in. So my parents were growing up in the 60s and 70s, so a lot of what Gima talked about is what I was taught growing up because that's what my parents knew. And we were also very religious. So in the church that we were in, not even like the church was itself taught us that, but the way my parents grew up then got indoctrinated, I guess, into me. To where, the wife stays home, she's a stay-at-home homeschool mom. She doesn't work. It's a one income household, which now as an adult in this day and age, like I'm there with Brendan looking at paychecks and looking at my mortgage, and I'm like, this is not happening. How am I supposed to be a stay-at-home mom? And truthfully, like truth be told, I'm living the life kind of that I always thought I would, where I'm like, oh yeah, I want to be a stay-at-home mom, but I don't want to be a homeschool mom. That's the difference. I don't want to be a homeschool mom for at least the entirety of my kids' lives. But I'm also living in the same world, right? To where I realize the world does look a little dire. And it doesn't look as dire as Brendan's world right now because I'm in the middle of the United States, so I'm not pre-gaming yet, I'm just sitting here in my little bubble. But I'm realizing, like, okay, there's a school in my city that a lot of my coworkers go to where they sell drugs. And I know kids, I've known kids who do drugs, and that's scary. Like they're in high school and they're having drugs available to them. So that's terrifying. Because like obviously I don't want to bring a child into that world and be like, have fun. But I also highly desire to bring in a generation of curse breakers. If I may bring up a little can of worms, there's a lot of what I call generational curses in my family, where it's just layers upon layers of generational trauma that's been layered on. And my generation of me and my sisters is the first that's, to be honest, like gone to therapy for it. And my goal is to have the first child that is free from that curse. And maybe that's selfish of me to desire to bring life into the world. But I also believe that, like, our source of life wants us to bring in this newness and this freshness. Because, like, in the Bible, and whether you're religious or not, it's take it or leave it, but God talks about the innocence of children and how beautiful that is. And I want to bring in this beautiful, fresh, innocent life and teach them how the world can be. I want to bring in ground shakers that will change the world and take this dire, dark place. Like they will be, I feel like every generation has been given more power. Like now I can have, like, there's 9-year-olds at my church who have smartphones. I'm like, you are literally holding a mini world in your hand,
Mm-hmm.
for better or worse, depending on the kid, right? And depending on their parenting and their family of origin. But I want to bring in this generation of ground shakers that as they receive the power, right? We teach them about it and we're like, well, here's where you've come from, and here's where we want you to take the world. Here's how we're working on the world. Please help us make it a better place. And because they are more powerful even than us, create even more of a change. Like, is that crazy? Like, it's one or two kids that I could even have, and maybe nobody else on earth has this mission. But if my however many kids I have can make a difference in some way, even more than I can, like, oof, I've done something right with my day,
Mm.
with my legacy. I want a legacy, and I think that's kind of where I'm sitting, where I'm like, I see both sides. I see the wife who stays at home, but I also see just the absolute power that we hold in our hands, and I want to teach the future generations like I was never taught, and I want to teach them to harness the power of the world and to make it their own. Maybe that sounds outrageous, but
No, I think it sounds very hopeful, and I think about like love. You have to have hope in love, love as a thing in and of itself must have hope,
mm,
otherwise you wouldn't be willing to make the risk or the sacrifice or, going back to the things that we've been talking about this whole time, we wouldn't be willing to enter into the potential pain of,
yeah,
love gone wrong or love ending or love changing and I still think this might be another conversation, but I get kind of tripped up in this conversation when we say things like I just said, because I feel like in and of itself, love by itself is a pure thing
mm,
and it's everlasting. I personally believe that love is the thing that is the fabric of the universe.
mm,
I don't think there would be a thing in existence outside of the energy of love.
mm,
Um, and so we learn to live and move and navigate and shift and change because situations change, relationships change, feelings change. I don't think those are the things that is the essence of love.
yeah,
I feel like we do things that are loving, we do things that reflect love at times, but also we do things that don't reflect love.
mm,
And so in that moment, we've maybe stepped out of the purity and the essence of love. But it's kind of like the yin yang thing for me again. It's like, maybe we're in the big bubble of love, even though there's like some little experiences that we're having that don't feel very loving or feel, unicorns and rainbows. Like I don't have fairy dust blowing out of my butthole like the whole time. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not real life, right? Like that's just not what we experience. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to share the love and buy us a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/the Becoming Home podcast. And hey, if you want to connect with us, you can find Joe on Instagram at committing_2_change, or find the link in the description or the show notes.
absolutely. And if you want to connect with my mom, Charlene, you can find her at fullyabundantlife.com, which will also be in the description and show notes. The Becoming Home podcast is a passion project to bring multi-generational perspectives to the hard topics that we face, becoming home for one another through vulnerability and respect. And we hope it has blessed you today.